Okay, so for this, let's just start off with Rothenberg.
Okay. Rothenberg, Part 1, The Invention of Heterosexuality. That was a very extensive look at the history of heterosexuality as a term.
And we didn't even get that term until, 1901? That wasn't even made into a real term. It was
I thought that was
1893.
interesting.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It didn't make its way to the dictionary or something until 1901. That was just in a medical journal to begin with.
Oh, yeah.
I really like this because, as I like all Rothenberg that explores the very intentional way that things get socially constructed, I thought this gave a very detailed outlook of, like, what love used to look like versus what we have. And so this was a good way of doing it.
Yeah.
The idea of heterosexuality as the master sex from which all others deviated was like the idea of the master race, deeply authoritarian, I think.
That was a good point. So it's just the idea, and also the influence of the market economy and capitalism in defining.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting how they brought that in, that cult of domesticity and the oppositeness of shifting work social roles and the power of men over women and how that played in.
Let's talk about how families moved from producer to consumer, and when becoming consumer became the value of pleasure itself. So it's like we're all producing, we're all making things happen, and then now we're entering the consumer role, so pleasure and the pleasure of sex is taking on a whole norm instead of being procreative altogether.
That door locked. Sorry, Dr. Goldsworthy. Sorry.
Just realized that. And the use of economics as the controller of racism and sexism to keep people down, and how in order for this oppression to be upheld, the 90% that made up the bottom had to continue to provide that cheap labor that reinforces the system. And then moving into like more
Are you talking about homophobia as a weapon of sexism?
I think I was. Sorry.
Oh,
Which still,
I was like, yeah.
I mean, it does,
but it still ties into it because of, like, we've seen the market influence the formation of race. We've seen it influence the formation of masculinity. So, like, the idea that it formulated sexuality itself, it ties in very much with homophobia as a weapon of sexism.
Yeah, and the part of it, heterosexual history out of the shadows. I like that the author made it clear that the idea existed long before it was named, so it's not some newly evolved thing, which seems rather obvious, but at the same time, you do have to sort of point these things out to some people. And that we're moving into a time where people write their own sexual history, and we're pulling heterosexuality and homosexuality and all sexualities out of the realm of nature and biology and into the realm of the social and historical, and that biology does not settle our erotic fates. So I thought that was really, really good for them to really write that out.
Yeah, especially with emerging, like, the Human Genome Project, neuroscience, I think just continually centering this on the role of culture and the role of society was a good, powerful way to end it.
I had written down some questions that I think were towards the middle or the end, hypothetical questions they didn't answer, but these really stood out to me and they got me thinking. What has been and is the social function of sexual categorizing? Whose interests have been served by the division of the world into heterosexual and homosexual? Do we dare not draw a line between those two erotic species? Is some sexual naming socially necessary? Would human freedom be enhanced if the sex biology of our partners in lust was of no particular concern and had no name? And last, in what kind of society could we all more freely explore our desire and our flesh? So, what is the purpose, really, of having these terms?
It gives people power and control. I mean, you have the dominant culture that can dictate what is right and wrong. That's what it comes down to. Heterosexuality is the social construct of anything else is deviance, and it just makes it easier for people to monetize off of it, objectifying women sexually, people to criminalize it. If you go off of the standard, not until recently, and still again, people are punished for going outside of even identifying as gay compared to in Tasmania in 1997, it's a criminal act.
Mhm.
It's giving people power that fear the difference. That's what I just saw. So.
Absolutely. But if we were to unlabel everything, then like maybe that power wouldn't have a name anymore. So completely postmodern world without labels.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to move on to homophobia as a weapon of sexism.
Gender roles, who do they serve? So that fits right in.
Yeah,
How
just
you
like what
brought that
Corey
up,
was
yep.
saying. Who do gender roles serve? Men and the women who seek power from them. Who suffers from gender roles? Women most completely and men in part. And how are gender roles maintained by the weapons of sexism, economics, violence, and homophobia?
I really enjoyed how spelled out this article was about. This one spoke to me in like I understand everything you're saying and I understand its ties, how they the intersectionality of this article as completely tied together. So like how gender roles then fuel the economy, how gender roles keep women in underpaid, underskilled labor, how that impacts racism, and then how homophobia fuels that.
What I thought was so interesting, and as women, I'm sure you guys have faced this many times too, that the fact that being called a lesbian, it's just like so unwarranted. Like anytime that we do, we reject a man or we stand up for ourselves or we act too aggressive, oh, you lesbian. Like, first off, I'm not offended if I'm called a lesbian, but like it was saying, that's deviating from the norm. When the male abuser calls a woman a lesbian, he's not so much labeling her a woman who loves women as he is warning her that by restricting him, she's choosing to be outside society's protection from male institutions and therefore from wide-ranging, unspecified, ever-present violence. So if we choose to be a lesbian, we don't get the protection. Like we should be so grateful that we should stick with them and then we're protected.
Yeah.
It's like an honor to be chosen by this guy, and why would you want to give up any of that privilege that he is trying to bestow upon you? And I don't know. All these readings, just like I see the toxic masculinity that just has so many roots in almost every different facet, every different system, trying to define women even though you're not a woman, but saying what a woman should be. I don't know. There's just so many different things that. And the flip side too is if a guy isn't masculine enough to want to force himself on a woman, even though he doesn't feel that way, he's gay. And then it's like, why don't you want women in the way that you want? I don't know. I'm glad you brought up that point. I don't know where I was going with that, but it was a good point. So.
I kind of want to bring it back, keeping on that same train of just how little meaning the word has. Because if any woman is at threat of being called a lesbian, like the word means nothing. So we can't like assign it, like we can't assume like that this isn't a socially constructed category, and we can't assume that it's natural or by choice. And I think that it made a really good point about. No, that whole conversation around lesbian baiting, which is what the author called it, was smart. Just the myth of protection that comes from men, because we say like attach yourself to marriage, attach yourself to a man, attach yourself to these institutions, and those same institutions, those same men turn around and abuse you, and you have nowhere to go as a result. So like, it's an entire myth of you're losing all this protection that you get from being a man, but also in this protection you risk violence every single day. So all of it is just, any way you turn, it's just bad.
Right.
That's
And the characteristics that people are equating to being a lesbian, the when we being independent, going our own way, living whole lives, fighting for our rights, demanding equal pay, saying no to violence, being self-assertive, bonding and loving the company of other women, assuming rights to our own bodies, that somehow makes us lesbians, you know?
Yeah.
So
What's wrong with those qualities? I don't
exactly.
normal.
The quality of a man, you know, it shows.
Is endowed by
so,
birth.
Yeah, but then that's the flip side of it all is if a woman embodies these qualities, she is the lesbian, she is the bad person, she shouldn't have those roles, but those are the great qualities that make everybody stand out and make them, you should have the freedom to have, I don't know, I see that it keeps on happening, and then it's like, why do you want people to feed into that? Why do you want people to be subjected that they need to have protection, but then you abuse them simultaneously? It's like, how do you not see what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
So they have to perpetuate the cycle because lesbians in particular are a threat to male dominance because they have no use for men whatsoever. And
Yeah.
that's the problem, is that you are in some ways taking away their power by saying they're useless to you, therefore you're a threat,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore you must be put down.
Mm-hmm.
So,
we can't do anything for them. So there's
yeah, they don't need us.
Mhm.
So there must be something wrong with them.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I like the point about to be a lesbian is to like live a woman-centered life, and so that is just an incredibly threatening thing of like, oh, I'm not in charge of everything. Let me see how I can.
something
You
I would.
figure out how to control that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but
Something I want to bring up about this article too is the internalized sexism. So that we live in a society in which woman hating is deeply embedded, and that we often call that internalized sexism low self-esteem that we get from our society that's showing us women in textbooks, advertising, TV, movies, porn, that we're sexually objectified, and that we as women we internalize these messages and end up, feeling sexism within. But that's just called low self-esteem. That we were always that way. We're just not very confident.
Came out of the blue, even though you've been barraged with messages 1,000 times every day for the entire life, but that's not our problem, it's your problem.
Yeah.
That's
you
what-
must be confident in yourself, but only if yourself looks like this.
And also while fighting every single message we've inundated with you since before you were born. Yeah, that's a really good point. So just like in some, homophobia works effectively as a weapon of sexism because it is joined with a powerful arm, heterosexism. Heterosexism creates a climate of homophobia with its assumption that the world is and must be heterosexual. It's the systemic display of homophobia in the institutions of society. I like just anything that goes beyond the nuclear family is condemned. The nuclear family as an arm of the patriarchy. What a fun look. That really is, the family is our first institution, and then we interact with other institutions within that same institution. Just good note.
And how that related to being a lesbian and what the losses that it could lead to at the end of the article, speaking about inequality in the workplace, being ostracized from your family, children, heterosexual privilege and protection, which we sort of already talked about, like male protection, your safety, mental health from the community, and even your credibility, can be questioned because of those things. So it's all leads back to that whole idea that because you have no need for male figures in your life, you must be completely put down. And it's this entire systemic process of getting you in every part of your life.
Yeah.
And bringing it down.
So you get labeled a feminist and you become a man hater,
Mhm.
and ergo you're a lesbian.
Yeah.
It's
angry,
very simple.
rigid
They're all
person. Yeah.
synonymous.
You know.
Honestly.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up to the feminist equaling man hater, and that feminist is now seen as an attack, to be called a feminist. I remember even years ago, before this program, someone was like, "You're a feminist." I'm like, "I'm not like relax, I'm not a feminist, But now I'm like, "Do you believe in equal rights of women?" Yeah. Surprise, you're a feminist too. But it's saying, effort to keep that definition man-centered. So to work on behalf of women, we must work against men. To love women must mean that one hates men. You know, it can't be that we respect the rights of men while also wanting equal rights for women. It's like we are man-haters against them. And, you know, that the term is just so abrasive. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of that today.
I liked how they ended this article with the comments about, like, we've started putting men on our feminist magazines. We've started giving awards to men as feminists. And it's like, that's not really, like, the point of this movement. Like, super, or rather, it's sad that you have to do that in order to accomplish the goals that you're trying to do. It's sad that you have to keep demonstrating, like, look, this is, men can be included, we don't hate men, look at how we're honoring men, versus, like, why can't we just decenter this conversation?
Feminism is a men's issue. You always hear that.
Yeah, and it is, but, like, also, it is strongly a women's issue, and a family and a children's issue, like, so that's...
Like, we're always having to defend feminism so that men aren't threatened by it.
Ridiculous.
So in terms of counseling and how this would impact yourself and your clients, I think it's pretty clear that knowing the orientation of your client and being aware of all the factors moving against them, and what they're coming from, if they come into you, you know, if they are actually angry or they are, you know, have low self-esteem or these issues, you know, it could come all the way back to the society that's been pushing them down this entire time. Being aware of that could really impact how you formulate your treatment plan and how you go from there.
I think about the web of oppression we did in class in terms of helping this client in one realm will meet resistance in another realm. Because if you look at homophobia as a weapon of sexism, then you have to look at the economy, you have to look at homophobia, you have to look at sexism, heterosexism, like, that's so much to work against. So, like, just counselors have to be advocates.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You guys ready to move into He Defies You Still?
Yeah.
This one and I think the next one we could probably do together.
Yeah.
Against bullying or on loving peer kids.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that there was a lot of overlap with those. And He Defies You Still, he's telling these stories about being bullied and these interactions with people. And again, and against bullying, sort of the same thing. Just these everyday occurrences that, you know, kids and adolescents do to each other that you've probably even witnessed, you know, throughout your entire school experience or not even experienced yourself. And how they can form the person who either becomes the bully or the person who is bullied.
Yeah. It really was the most common insult there was. You know, if a guy or a boy acted any way that was out of line as to how a heterosexual male should act, it's, you know, you're a sissy, you're gay, you're a faggot, whatever. And the need that boy would feel to defend, no, you know I'm not, and what that would mean, he would need to do in order to show that, you know, and it goes back into the, I think 2 videos ago when we read the one about that
Tough guys?
That boys are bred at an early age for, like, violence and aggression and stuff. You know, the fear of being called a sissy, you know, they would do anything in order to not have that title. Like, that was the worst thing there was. Now, we look at it and we're like, if that was us, we'd laugh and be like, screw you. But at that time, you're so impressionable. The opinion of your peers is everything. And as we saw in He Defies You Still, just the life that he painted for himself, you know, he said contact with others meant pain. Like, that's the message he got. That, you know, being around other people meant pain for him. And being alone meant he was safe. So how is that going to affect his development?
And I think long term too, that both articles did a good way of pulling out the focus, because in He Defies You Still, the author talks about the erasure of gay history. Of I was alone. There was no one who looked like me. I learned about these people, but I never learned they were gay. And to where that's a very intentionally cultivated phenomenon in which you create isolation, which brings into the next point that the Against Bullying or Unloving Queer Kids author does. He says it's tougher, more uncertain work creating a world that loves queer kids. He talked about how liberal policies will allow teachers to teach if they're gay, but the moment you say, I'm not married because gay marriage isn't legal, that's inappropriate for children.
Yeah.
So it's the way, like, you have to intentionally create a safe and nurturing society, and we're not doing that. And what that looks like is death. That looks like teen and adolescent suicide.
And this article, I think, Corey, you had read this previously too, right? The main point of this was that it's easiest to point the finger on, the perpetrators, the bullies, if only the bullies and whatever. But we're not promoting or teaching how we can love queer kids more. And just like, unfortunately, we're seeing today, from our president and other people, that it's easier to point to, oh, well, this person shouldn't have done that, and if only we could have whatever, rather than, like, the real, teaching love and acceptance.
Yeah, in the society, like, you've raised these kids up in a society that teaches them how to be bullies, but as soon as they act on those impulses that you have taught them, now they've stepped outside the lines, and now it's criminalized, but you raised them to be these things, and now you're punishing them for being them.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good point the author made about maybe these kids shouldn't be charged with a hate crime. Undoubtedly this caused a really bad, the students who filmed their roommate, and then he completed suicide as a result. And the author was like, that's what happens. You did this. And, this isn't a mystery. This wasn't surefire, vitriol of hate. This was a natural progression. I thought that was a really good point.
And while it is, the common reflex to say, and we should be having better education and anti-bullying prevention and this and that, just going back to, there's not enough teaching about accepting and loving queer kids. And going back into He Defies You Still, I always went to Christian schools my whole life. My high school was very strict Catholic. Was yours?
Yeah, we were Catholic.
And, we had priests as our teachers. We had Mass every Wednesday. In the literature, we never, ever talked about homosexuality. I even had a good friend who was very openly gay, but it was only okay because he didn't explicitly tell the priest that he was gay. And he even said, he's like, the second I tell them I'm gay, it's all going to go down. They'll stop looking at me this way. We don't have enough stories about accomplishments from LGBT members or trans people, It's just not talked about. So, of course, the people are going to bully it, look at it like it's something to...
That's the thing, they don't have figureheads, which are obviously there, but and He Defies You Still, kept on repeating it, there is no history for you to wake up to tomorrow. There's nothing for you to take glory and just be happy to be who you are, because we don't want you to be seen. We want you to blend in. We want you to be isolated because it's not the norm. And I don't know, rereading again, I know I talked about it a couple weeks back about unloving queer kids. Anti-bullying movements necessary. Obviously, we don't want kids to get bullied, no matter who it is. But what is anti-bullying getting at? Stopping violence, obviously, but it stops there. It doesn't go further back. It doesn't say, well, maybe we need to talk to the parents. Maybe we need to go to the communities. It's just, let's look at this one little thing that's a symptom of so many other things, and then it just stops there because we don't want to go deeper. We want to look at, maybe we are the ones feeding into the system. Maybe the way we have ideals about things are feeding into that. I don't know, I just think things need to be changed, because obviously we can't allow things to happen with bullying, but it doesn't go far enough back. So.
Yeah, Corey, that's a great point.
Yeah.
I just got that chills, because I never even have really even thought about it that much further. You're right. We teach in schools, if a kid is bullying, we're like, no, be nice to your neighbor. Don't do that.
See something, say something.
See, everybody's different. Be nice to the different people. But we don't really look into, maybe it's because we're scared of finding out where it's coming from. The parents, the families, the society that we are, part of building.
And it's also not even we're scared of finding it. We actively condone it. We actively say, you know what? That is how little boys learn how to toughen up and not be sissy. So, don't bully because I don't want to get in trouble as your teacher. But, that's just boys will be boys. Can't really find all that. And they have to learn how to be boys.
Don't pick on the one gay kid, but go fight people or to go get in the football team, go hit people, go do all this other stuff. But we don't want you to be aggressive anywhere else. But we want you to be aggressive here. We want you to be not aggressive there.
Sublimate your...
Yeah, I actually worry about that and what you were saying about how the anti-bullying campaigns really are focused on just stopping the violent behavior in the moment. It doesn't address the thoughts behind it. It doesn't address the society that built it. So basically, you're suppressing those angry feelings and that violence in somebody who isn't learning to process it or getting that violence out of them. And that just makes me think, are you building harsher criminals or harsher adults or adolescents when they're older and there's less supervision? Because you haven't addressed the issues in the past and you haven't changed their thinking. You've just said, don't be violent here. Outside of school, not my concern. Don't bully kids at school where you can be seen. So are you putting it in the parking lot? Are you putting it on the walks home from school? Are you just moving where the bullying is happening someplace else?
And we're not doing enough because the victims of bullying are those who violate our social norms.
Let's be honest. If you have someone that already has biases against someone, they bully them, punish them, do you think they're going to feel bad for the person they victimized? No, they're going to be angrier. They're going to continue doing it. You didn't teach them anything new. They didn't develop awareness. Oh, this person has a rough life. No, they just are going to continue into the cycle. It doesn't change anything.
So I want to end these two with bringing it back to the council this year because I'm deeply impacted by this conversation about how we validate. And Sue kind of talked about this a little bit too, of just you have to actively affirm and validate LGBTQ plus members. This is something that you intentionally have to do, and intentionally educate, and intentionally lay the safe groundwork for. Because without it, then you've got nothing to fall back on.
Yeah, I had written down that one from Sue and Sue that it's important for mental health counselors to take an affirming position that validates and help normalize the individual's identity.
Which may even include a bit of psychoeducation and even cultural awareness education in making them aware of successful people who, share the same identity as them, and making them aware of people who have, come out publicly or, who have spoken their truth, and making them aware that there are people like you, there are success stories, there are people in history who were just like you. And even though you didn't know about them then, I want you to know about them now.
Would it be okay
give them back their history?
If we went to Sue and Sue, because I feel like it's kind of ties, because a lot of the Sue and Sue chapter talked about how as counselors, what we can be doing and what we should be addressing. And then we can go back into the other one. Going off of what you were just saying, Andrea, it was saying that LGBT youth often face the coming out process alone, without the potential support and nurturance of peers, parents, and other family members, or others who have gone through the same struggle. And I had never really thought about that before, because personally, if I'm ever going through a hard time or a life transition or something, I immediately turn to my mom, a friend, the internet, media, of a TV character that I was going through the same thing, whatever. And pretty much there's always somebody that I can talk to. Whether they fully get it or not, there's always somebody. But to be coming out, that's not an experience that's shared among everybody around you. So who are you going to talk to about that? Who are you going to get that nurturance and that support as you go through this really difficult time? I didn't ever think how, I knew it could be isolating, but how incredibly isolating that could be. So as counselors, again, normalizing their experience, helping connect them to support groups, resources where they could find people like them.
Yeah, there's, I'm speaking from experience too here, of just that feeling of isolation and the calculation that you do around coming out. In students who talked about it, about how you should work on a plan and think about outcomes, think about consequences. And like even when you know the person and you feel safe with this person, you're like, this person has other gay friends, this person has known me for years, this person has this and this view. It's still like an incredibly nerve-wracking experience for some reason. So it's just like, it is a hard thing to understand until you like go through it.
Yeah.
So I like the attention that students usually put place on that.
And like you were just saying about kind of making like a treatment plan around it and planning that thing, it was saying that in going into like the intersectionality of it too, the experience for people of color is often difficult when coming out. They frequently face both rejection from their communities and racism from the majority culture. So they're already dealing with, being a minority group. And among the working poor, it also means the possibility of losing their jobs. I thought this was something I had never really considered, that life can be hard enough, just the racism, discrimination they face on a daily basis. Yeah. Mix into that another reason for them to be facing oppression and discrimination. And like we learned with certain cultures, like Mexican, that machismo or whatever, the manly, I didn't really consider what it would be like coming out as a certain culture, as a group of color. That adds just another layer to it of difficulty.
Also taking into consideration is if we want our clients to own their identity, we're making sure if they're not comfortable going forward with the process of coming out, respecting that decision, because 9 times out of 10 there are a lot of negative consequences, like you've already mentioned. Is yes, to be their whole self in the moment is what we want our clients to be, but if they were to face so many negative consequences that could lead to physical assault and all those other things, are we putting our own feelings on them that we want them to be who they are, or are we respecting what they need to do to keep them the safest as well? And that's the thing, is like, again, it's terrible to be different in this country, and if we want our clients to be who they are, but we also have to take into consideration that we're not in a society where that's always readily accepted.
Yeah, that's really a consideration that for counselors, that we have to totally separate ourselves and not just think, well, we gotta let them be who they are, and we'll be there and accept them. We really need to assess their current life situation. What if it's a single family household and it's one income and they could lose their job? Like, we really, it's tricky, and that's going to be a hard one, having to assess when it's the right time, and to tell clients maybe it's not. That's going to be so hard.
That's the thing, is like, we can always provide that safe space for them, but we can't control everything else around the world. And obviously, with the advocacy component comes into the whole counseling situation, but there's so many moving parts, especially when the intersectionality start compounding. If you are a different marginalized population, if you're a low income, all sort of stuff, maybe coming out now, and it's not that we want to forbid them from being who they are, but there's so many things going on.
Yeah. No. Sort of connecting what we were talking about with loving queer kids and where we are right now with coming out. I was raised, and I believe that children accept the world as you present it to them, and that's how I raised my children. My children think nothing of the fact that women can love women and men can love men, or any combination thereof, because that is how I've presented the world to them. It's not something I have to explain later on in life. It's just how it is. And that is how it was, luckily for me, that is how it was for me when I was growing up in this particular area, because my mom had lesbian friends. And so, and you guys probably were just being born at this time, when Ellen DeGeneres came out on her show, Ellen, when she had the sitcom Ellen.
I watched the videos.
I actually saw that
That's cool.
when the show was on. And thinking back on it now and seeing how she has been honored in the LGBTQ community for doing that and how historical that was, and thinking back on, I remember watching that on TV, it didn't mean anything to me when I saw it, because I had been raised to believe that it was fine. my personal experience of actually having witnessed this historical moment was just like,
Unfazed.
yeah, like it wasn't like the rest of the world was like shocked. And I mean, my little bubble, and I mean, I was still young at that time too, but I was in like 6th or 7th grade, and I just was like, and moved on with my life. But I mean, it was a historical moment for me, not like that. And that moment has actually impacted the entire community as well, you know. So
yeah, I hope that, I mean, and that's our work as advocates, that's our work as individuals in social justice, of just making the world to where you are what you are, and like you can welcome people. I think Sanabria used the expression of like not coming out but welcoming people in, which is what a lovely expression, and also like how I started reframing my own story. Just like, how nice would it be to have that's what you're up to nowadays. You're dating ladies, like, so
like, it
one
doesn't have to
day,
be news. Like, it's not news. It's just like,
but to not minimize the importance of nowadays that is news and that is an act of bravery. So when our clients do it, when our peers and our friends do it, like, you honor that.
Yeah.
And you make that safe space.
And in a counseling perspective, even though I was raised to not think it's a big deal, that's also a bias that I have to be aware of, is that if somebody comes into me and they say, I'm gay, to me, I'm like, okay. But to them, it might be the end of the world because their family isn't going to accept it, or, you know, they're ashamed, or they're not out, and all of those things. So even when you are accepting of it, being aware that you might be looking at it as not as huge of a problem as it is. So meeting the client where they are in their journey, and being aware of that as well.
Excellent point. Sue and Sue talked a lot about strengths and resiliencies, as they usually do. So they talked about one of the strengths of LGBT people is their tendency to build community, make found families, also like work towards social justice, like that and an identity is like important and healthy, and people draw strength from being able to like build that social support that you need very intentionally.
Yeah.
So tapping into that as counselors will be important to keep in mind with our clients.
What's next?
Do you guys want to go back to
The case of Sharon Kowalski and Karen Thompson.
This one was sad.
This one was very sad.
I feel, I guess after all of this, it's not really surprising. It just feels like everything failed her. You know, everything failed her.
The system's working against anybody that's not a white male. It's just a common example of sexism, the heterosexism,
Ableism.
and the ableism. I mean, for God's sakes, you're classifying someone as incompetent because they can't simply speak, because they had an accent. Now you're going to say they don't get a say in their entire life, but then taking away the support and obviously putting them in a more degrading situation where they're going to decompensate, and you think that's a good situation because you're trying to uphold the white standard value. That's what it came down to.
Mm-hmm. Like, literally, it was that they weren't able to support the things she needed that were vital to her recovery.
Yeah.
They would rather, her family and the system would rather her health deteriorate. You know, she was clinically depressed. Wait, was Karen the one who?
Karen was the partner.
Okay, so
Sharon
Karen
was the one in the hospital.
you know, massaging and stretching her body, the improvements that Sharon made when Karen was there, and then how she declined when she wasn't, you know, that they would rather accept that their daughter's health is declining, that she could maybe even die, you know, that she'll never get better, rather than consider that there's this wonderful option, you know, that will improve her health and her happiness. I mean, there are so many things about this to consider and so many other aspects, but that was what hit me the most, that's how against this her parents were, you know, and even like the legal system.
And the medical staff themselves who could record that Sharon improves under Karen's care, and they wouldn't record. Or that one doctor who did go on stand and was like, I've fought with my conscience about this, I've prayed about this. And it's like, what about your damn fucking Hippocratic oath? You know?
Yeah.
Like,
There was a one line from the doctor saying he was afraid that parent was sexually abusing her because she was taking longer when she was bathing her, and that was sexual misconduct, and that's why she wasn't allowed to see Sharon for a time. Like, are you serious? She can't take care of herself, and she's doing it to help her out, and you're gonna say she's sexually abusing her?
That was so disturbing, like that, and that would never happen with a heterosexual.
And that was a good point about we have this inability to separate sex from same-sex couples.
Right.
One of the
Everything
reasons why,
is sexual.
yeah, I hate the term bisexual actually because it sounds so sexual. When it's really just like a descriptor of orientation, rather, and like we have a very hard way of picking it apart, and that's why we think like same-sex couples are inappropriate for children to see because we immediately sexualize every aspect of it. And it's like, you don't do that to heterosexual people.
Or transgenders using the bathroom of their choice. You know, it puts our children at risk of pedophilia. Like, you're right, and that's what I had written something from Sue and Sue that as counselors we need to not lacking an understanding of identity development in lesbian women and gay men, or viewing homosexuality solely as a sexual activity. And like, I think that a good part of my life, just from family, my community, that's how we saw it. That's how we saw gays. Was that they did different things with private parts, and we just saw the sexual aspect. You know, like we didn't see them as humans or as relationships and consider other things. It was simply
They're deviant.
what do they do with their parts, and it's different than ours, and it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it was solely sexualized. So I'm really liking that. I'm being able to really expand on my knowledge base of the differences.
And speaking of the legal battles and everything, I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe that there have been significant improvements when it comes to same-sex partners.
Mm-hmm.
And having, like, the right to be the person who has
The
authority.
right to marriage brought about much
Yeah.
of the needed changes in this case,
Yes.
which is excellent. And a lot of discourse I saw after that was like, don't think this is the end of the fight for gay rights, because everything else is still happening. Like you get guardianship, you get your name on death certificates, so you can get inheritance and whatnot. But like, so a lot of this case is had they had the right to marry at the time,
It would have prevented.
it would have
much of
prevented
this.
a lot of this. Not all of it, not the ableism aspects of it, but
And again, going back to that string activity and how the failure of the medical system was even supported by the judicial system. So upholding again that oppression. So
And what I was thinking as I was reading it too is like, just thinking back to our ethics class and our strict ethical codes and everything, I was like, okay, well if that happened today, then obviously those doctors would be in trouble for breaking their ethical codes. And then I was like, would they though? You know, like how much coverage would this get? How much movement would be made on this? Would it have been the same as it was then? And that was just a fleeting thought that was chilling.
thoroughly depressing.
Yeah.
I like the final note that the author made about the bringing in Audre Lorde's term of there's no hierarchy of oppression here. Sexism, heterosexism, and ableism worked seamlessly together to create this, and are holding down so many other people in this exact same capacity, just without the same sort of light. So there's no hierarchy. You have to get out of all systems in order to get out one system. It's a big task.
I like that you brought up too that with the legalization of same-sex marriages too, and if that things could have been different for that case too, since we had to read that the Supreme Court rules in favor of same-sex marriage nationwide, that they maybe would have been granted
Those protections.
Her right as her partner would have been respected and legally held up if this had been wrong. Like that.
You wouldn't have sent a woman into the guardianship of an adult woman into the guardianship of her father. Like,
The legal system still worked against them even when things were supposed to be in her favor. Like she was allowed to get visitation, but they actively denied her visitation because they could. It wasn't,
because the guardian didn't need to enforce it.
It was like when she was at one of the rehabilitation places, the doctor felt like she shouldn't have visitation when she clearly was allowed to, just because.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with legality, just because they didn't want to.
Yeah, it was her dad. He said he didn't want to take her out on excursions because he didn't want her to be seen in this sort of condition. And it's like, well, she benefits from this. She wants to do
What
this.
she wants.
Like you're just hiding away your daughter for absolutely no reason, just out of spite. Anyway, people are bad.
Yes.
Yeah, take a deep breath after that one.
I guess the summary of this.
Okay.
So
We should move on.
we're talking about the right to marry, though. Let's go ahead and do that
Okay.
newspaper article, and then we'll head back to the heterosexual development. So the Supreme Court rules in favor of same-sex marriage nationwide.
Yay.
Yeah,
I do
It's like-
remember when that happened, like you were
Yeah.
saying,
that was
that we were, told to celebrate, it's great, but the fight isn't over. Like, I remember even that day, it was like, woo, enjoy, celebrate, but we're not done. There's still a lot that can happen and a lot that needs to be done.
Don't get complacent.
Yeah, that was like the tone I remember.
Now there's like the ifs and the buts. The states are like, well, even though it's nationwide, can we change it locally? Can we do it this way? Do we have to respect it from another state? It's like, even though there's a branch and the umbrella of all this, doesn't mean it really like changes the mindsets of people outside.
Yeah.
Even though like legally to be respected, obviously it doesn't change how people view it. And that's again, the fight isn't done. We still have to work to, even though we have this legal backing, people need to change their ways, their thoughts, and their actions, their feelings. And again, loving people rather than let's find ways to separate them, make them worse.
Unloving people. A good way to put it, too, because without that just cultural impetus to love one another, then we have a cultural impetus that allows hatred. And like in this ruling, Roberts was intentional in saying, like, sure, you get your marriage, but this had nothing to do with the Constitution,
Yep.
which is a very chilling reminder of you still have no protection. The Constitution still does not value you. It's just this is how the court ruled today. And it can be overturned at any point, frankly, because this was a 5-4 decision and not rooted in the Constitution, according to Roberts. So, like, it's more than fighting for rights. It's creating protections and creating self-safety and creating love.
Yes.
Anything else to say about same-sex marriage?
Should we just do North Carolina law while we're here?
Ugh.
Okay.
This law.
Yeah.
Squirted cup.
I am proud of the extent to which organizations and businesses, the NBA, like the basketball tournament, when they were like, we're not going to hold our conference here if you're not going to allow this transgender bathroom law, like if you're not going to allow transgender people to use the bathroom of their choice, and not even the bathroom of their choice, their bathroom.
Yeah.
So that was a nice point of advocacy. A sadder point of this is that the things are still in effect because you can't pass anti-discrimination laws.
Yeah.
The replacement is an anti-discrimination law.
My hugest issue with this is how they basically, and it's not even, they're just being very blatant about it, that they've criminalized being transgender because they're going to sexually abuse children in bathrooms. And my point is that you really have a problem with sex offenders.
Yeah.
Like, so if you have a male sex offender who identifies as male and he's in the male bathroom and there's a male child in there, where was your concern about that male child? Like, maybe we should just ban sex offenders from public bathrooms.
Yeah, that's a
You
really good point.
Like, were you worried about the sex offenders who were affecting children in the bathrooms that you wanted them to go to? Because now you're worried about the transgender people, transgender sex offenders. And please tell me if you know the specific statistics of that, because I don't, and I'm sure nobody looked into that before they started like publishing this.
Yeah.
So, as someone with children, my thought is, one, you just don't send your kids to the bathroom alone because, duh, you know, because there are people that are bad out there, and it has nothing to do with being transgender.
But like you said, it's more of an understanding too. Like, you don't send your kids to the bathroom alone because maybe there could be a kidnapper or a pedophile. But that hasn't been spoken about anywhere near the concern of transgender people using the bathrooms. It's not like there could be a pedophile, we should do something about that. There could be a transgender, we need to do something about that now. Like, our kids are in danger.
It goes back to the transphobia, true at its heart, of just transgender people are seen as imposters, they're seen as deviants, and they're seen as like invaders, and it's immediately noticed for when you want to think that you can notice a transgender person, but it's immediately at least labeled as deviant and criminalized. One of the articles during, I think it was the Stonewall one that I read a couple of weeks ago, talked a lot about just like, maybe it wasn't, but just the violence that transgender people face as a result of just being outside of this norm. So where we uphold gender categories so strongly that anything that touches upon that outside of the binary is immediately a sex offender.
And they have to criminalize it because if they can't identify you, they don't know where to put you on the spectrum, which means they don't know whether they should give you power or not. Because if you don't identify as a cisgender male, that would give you power, then you have to be somewhere below female. So if you can't say, even if you are a white male but you're transgender and identify as female, they don't want to take away your power because they see you as a white male, but you're deviant, so
you're a traitor.
Yes, you're just sort of creating this like tension within their midst, like they don't know which box to put you in, and that's frustrating for them. And it threatens, again, male dominancy.
I thought it was interesting in some of the reading, wherever it was, that the statistics showed that people who were transitioning from female to male had an easier time rather than male to female because the females to male realized that they had some more power and that the male to the female lost the power they had, especially if it was a white male, that appeared to be heterosexual. So, unrelated, but still related.
Totally relevant, honestly.
Little sprinkle.
How layered all of this is.
So where are we?
We are on the heterosexuality development model with the Worthington article.
Okay.
This one was a doozy.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, I did not fully understand all of this.
It was a lot. But the first thing I had realized before I even really got into it was, wow, this sounds kind of like the white identity model. I was saying that research suggests how heterosexuals view their identity development is non-existent. And I was like, yeah, like the white identity model, that it's not something heterosexuals or white people think about often, or like think that they have this big development.
Yeah, you don't have to come out as being straight.
Yeah.
It's just, everybody is straight until they come out as being other.
And it's seen as like a natural process when like it is entirely not. Like, especially like the older I get and the like farther I am on and like my own journey, just like looking at the heterosexual socialization process, it is extreme. And we don't pay enough attention to it. So I really do like this article of just like little boys like, oh, is that your little girlfriend? Like, he's
like
2.
her.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting, and I mean there are so many definition and facts and all this. This is a doozy. But when I was talking about the 4 ego identity states, and the second one was foreclosure, it was saying that the largest part of people identified with identity foreclosure in a study, and foreclosure is the acceptance of an identity imposed by expectations of other people or society without exploration. So most people, and I probably would too, identify that we just kind of, we look at our heterosexuality as like normal, and that's just what society's put on us, so we don't really explore further. It is what it is.
You get to a point in your life where it's like, I've done enough, I'm content where I'm at. If I explore outside of that, I'm going outside of the box. It's like, there's consequences now that I'm solidified and where I'm identifying as, I shouldn't be exploring anymore, I shouldn't be thinking about anymore, I shouldn't go past my heterosexualness, so.
Right.
I thought early in the article they said, and this is just good about all oppression, members of subordinate groups are hypothesized to be more likely than members of powerful groups to perceive their socio-demographic characteristics as influencing and limiting access to resources and opportunities whereas members of dominant social groups may be more inclined to overemphasize the influence of group membership as a determinant of behavior and justification for one's privileged status. So that was a lot of words to say, like, members of targeted identities are more likely to say, like, this limits my access, versus members of dominant groups are more likely to say, like, you're disadvantaged because you are this, but I'm not advantaged because I'm this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The disadvantage is spoken, but the advantage is like never spoken.
Mm-hmm.
If that's so similar in the instances of like white privilege as well. Like, yes, I can see that the world is unfair to you because you're a person of color, but I don't have privileges. I had to work for everything I had, and nobody was handing out gold stars to me, and all the things that I always hear when that word like privilege is spoken, and it's really like you don't understand that you get to live this normal life and not have to think about your interaction with the world or how the world perceives you. That's the privilege, because nobody else on earth gets to live like that. We have to be constantly aware of your existence.
Mm-hmm.
That's the privilege. And that's the same with any marginalized group.
Mm-hmm.
You constantly have to be aware of what the dominant group is doing. And that's their privilege, is that they don't have to be aware of
They're the norm.
Yeah.
And you're right. So some of the influences on heterosexuality development were biology, microsocial context, culture, religious affiliation, and systematic homonegativity, sexual prejudice, and privilege. All of those factors, as we've constructed them, benefit heterosexual people. We've been told in science classes, like, this is the natural biological process. This is hormones make you attracted to other people of the opposite sex in a good, natural way. Microsocial context of the family. This is all messages benefit heterosexuality. Things like that. And then it got into the actual heterosexual identity development.
I thought too, going into how we can apply this as counselors.
Oh yeah.
Being aware of our own heterosexual identity model, if we identify as heterosexual, that's something I wouldn't have considered ever before reading this article. That we need to see where we're at with our own development, if we have any biases, to actually realize we have an identity, just like a white identity model, that's going to interfere or affect our counseling. So, just to consider.
And someone who is identifying currently as being heterosexual, but there's some discourse, like some resistance in that, and they're not very content in it. They may be in one of these in-between phases where they're not sure that they are heterosexual, or they're not gay and they have no words for the in-between space, and helping them find, where they fall in between there, and accepting that.
Yeah, that's a good point. About just individual assessment and like understanding that this is a developmental process.
Yeah. And that it's always in flux. It's not something that's rigid and static.
It's an individual and a social process, so it's going to be shaped by what's going on right now for you and what's going on right now out here.
Yeah.
All right, how do you guys feel about moving into the movies? We're 55 minutes in.
Yeah, a little bit long, a little bit more than 55. I started that late.
Oh, okay.
I want to talk about Nanette last.
Okay.
So let's talk about Accessory to Murder first.
So this one was particularly affecting because it's so close to home. It happened so close to
How
home.
many minutes is Polk County from here? Like,
Not that far.
About 45 minutes to an hour.
Oh, really?
Not that far at all. Like on I-4 heading towards Tampa. You're gonna drive right through it.
I actually thought about you while we watched this too, because they focused so much on his mother. I was like, Andrea might not be having a fun time with this. Actually, I thought about you.
I think his mother, they did focus a lot on her, but I think that they also, a lot of his friends, and as they were speaking, they're like, I don't know why he had such a hard time coming out to his mom, because his mom was a great mom, and she was the kind of mom he would want to have. And then when she said, he was trying to come out to her, and she was just like, "Are you ever just gonna say it, or are we just gonna act like it's not here?" And so I could totally see, yes, that being me, like, I'm your mother, I've known you were gay since you were 4 years old,
Or
like
just
she
like-
said, you know, like this is not news to me.
Or just even like I was just more thinking of like the pain that was clearly evident in this, that I can't understand as a mother. Like,
Yeah.
I'm in like
I didn't
grappling
really
with
think about that,
Yeah.
Like the loss of a child in general, and then having it be such a violent and specific, like, targeting. Like, if it was a senseless loss, you know, drive-by shooting, drunk driver, like, it's not specific to your child. But this was very specific to him and his identity, you know, and so I can't even imagine that loss. Like, somebody hating one of my children for being who they are, I can't even imagine that. I can't even comprehend it.
You know, going into this movie, I knew it was going to be about a hate crime, so I knew it was going to be, you know, heavy and upsetting. But what I just still can't stop thinking about is the way that Ryan Skipper was, the way that the crime was depicted by the sheriff. You know,
I'm so
Yeah.
happy you brought that
by
up. Oh my
the
god.
way that, by the statement he released, you know, whether he knew what he was doing, he didn't know what he was doing. I mean, because he did that, it didn't get the coverage that it deserved. His identity was tarnished. The family probably having to deal in such a, you know, conservative community. They can't. Their tragedy, their grief, couldn't be honored properly because here they're dealing with, you know, the hate of the community, and they don't see this as something terrible that happened to him. They saw it like he brought this on to himself because he was in the wrong neighborhood doing the wrong thing. You know, oh, those gays, so sexual. If only he wasn't out looking for sex, this wouldn't have happened to him. It totally put the blame on him and not the criminals. Like he was speaking from like a murderer perspective.
Yeah, the sheriff never apologized and just took the murderers of like, yeah, that checks out. That's exactly how this went down. You had no ulterior motives for telling me this version of the story.
Yeah. This is not a hate crime.
He brought this on. It was a gay panic. He brought this on himself. You reacted totally justified. And like the tales that his friends talked about too, about like how Ryan had been harassed in their own home and there were witnesses and they filed a report and nothing happened. Like this sheriff was someone who knew Ryan and someone who just didn't care enough or / had just pure malintent in his lie and believing the murderers. It was just, yeah, very infuriating. And another interesting part of this video was how much time everyone was like, I wanted him to move to Orlando. I wanted him to move down to South Florida where he would be safer and more accepted. And finally, the human rights group activists, and it was like, he shouldn't have needed to move, you know?
Yeah.
This is his
It's all
home.
he's
He
known.
can't be blamed for wanting to be where he was loved.
Why are we going to blame the victim? Why are we forcing the victim to change their location rather than addressing the issue with the society that's creating the issue itself? And that's the thing. I'm glad you brought that up. We want him to change his lifestyle because the people that are the perpetrators are not willing to change their own.
Yeah.
Instead of working to change how they view the world, we're just going to make all of these marginalized populations, we'll just ship you off because you need to change because they're not willing to change.
But what hurt too was it came from all his friends and his family from a genuine place of love and protection. Of like, I want you to be safe and I want you to live your life. And that's painful for them to have that separation, but also shows how much we need to bring up our scope.
Yep.
And one of the Rothenberg readings, like the first week, it was the fire's oppression. She talked about oppression as a bird cage, where you might see a bar, you might see two, but until you see the entire cage, and just like those family members, they only saw that like one aspect, like here and now.
Yeah.
But it came from a place of love, and that's really hard to work with.
And going back to I think feel like we always come back to how these different systems connect to each other and how they continue to create this world. And it talks about hate crimes in Florida and how the state has one of the highest rates of hate crimes. And what stood out to me was when they were talking about the Laramie Project, which has been widely accepted, and the superintendents or whoever it was declared it to be inappropriate for Polk County schools. So you've got this county that's rural that has produced at least 2 different killers for hate crimes, and you're saying that a project that promotes this is inappropriate? You are literally creating this culture.
The cognitive dissonance there.
Don't forget they elected an All-American county 2 months later.
You know, Andrew, it's funny you brought that up because at my very Catholic private high school, I was in drama for all my years, and we were going to go to a competition called States, ITS, and we wanted to perform a piece from the Laramie Project because it was made into like a play. And we had to fight like hell for the principal and the dean because they had to approve everything we did. We couldn't do a lot of performances with like swearing and whatever. I don't even think there was any swearing in this piece. We had to fight like hell because they said they didn't like the content wasn't appropriate, and we were like, what about it isn't appropriate? Like we were like up in their face, like tell us. We would like it in written words.
Like,
tell us what about it isn't appropriate, and we basically like harassed them until they let it pass and they let us do it. But we really have to fight like hell for that.
Good.
Good for you for doing that.
Yeah.
Law enforcement under-responded, victim blaming, lack of media attention. Like the Reverend in the movie said, if it had been an upstanding citizen, if it had been a child, if it had been anyone other than a gay male, this would have gotten national coverage.
But and on all accounts, Ryan was an upstanding citizen.
Yeah.
And that is so, but that one aspect of his identity just knocked that out. It didn't matter that he was a very good person, who was very deeply loved. It didn't matter.
Because he was gay and he was killed because he was gay. It was like, oh no, not touching that.
Let it be. Let's just let that be where it belongs. Let's not talk about it. All right.
Let's go into the net.
God love her. I thoroughly enjoyed her. I really wanted to write down a lot of the things that she was saying. A lot of them weren't appropriate to write down. Especially about her flower pot metaphor.
Oh, yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed.
Flesh vases for your
Yes.
flowers.
Oh, God love her.
I wonder if that audience knew that what they were getting into. I wonder if they thought they were just going to a comedy show that may air on Netflix, or if they knew that they were in for an evening of awakening.
Yeah. It
Dripping
definitely
in
was
my throat.
It was definitely a roller coaster of emotion.
And I
thought
loved
that
every second of it.
I really did. The fact that she was from Tasmania, I didn't really know anything about
Me
Tasmania.
neither. I knew nothing. Tasmanian devil. That's it.
Uh,
That's all I know.
and that it was homosexuality literally was illegal until 1997, and that they really did send her a letter. She said it, and it seems like she was joking, but she wasn't.
I thought she was joking.
No, you really get a letter.
For real?
Yeah.
I totally thought that was a joke.
Wow.
They really do,
I thought it was a joke.
get out.
Wow.
If you chose to be gay, is how they phrase it. If you choose to be gay, you need to leave Tasmania. And that's how they basically controlled that issue.
I thought she had a really powerful way of showing unveiling the entire experience of what it is like to grow up and realize you're a lesbian in a Bible Belt county or Bible Belt island, and what that means leading down the road for you. She talks about, and I really think that it tied in so strongly to Bell Hooks' A Transformational Politic, where she gave her entire life experience of harassment, assault, rape, being beat up, just like isolation and shame, soaked in shame is how she put it. And for her to end it on a story where she's yelling, what about his humanity? I don't care about his reputation, what about his humanity? And my anger is understandable, but my anger will not heal me. Like, she had such a very powerful way of love, moving into that loving space of activism. I love Nanette. She really shaped this. I watched this right before the semester, and I've been thinking about this documentary the whole time. I think that's all I have to say on Nanette, though.
I thought some of the things that she said regarding her identity and how she was viewed as like not lesbian enough to be lesbian, but too lesbian to be anything else, and how she referred to other lesbians as my people. Like throughout the whole thing.
My people.
And how her only examples, like we talked about earlier, like not having a history, not having, that culture to surround her and identify with, the lack of education, and having, I'm not familiar with Mardi Gras in Australia.
Mardi Gras in Australia is their gay pride. It's not connected to Mardi Gras.
Okay, I was not familiar with that at all, but I did, as her saying, like, that's all she got. Like, that was her exposure. This is how to be gay, or this is how to be a lesbian, and she was like, where are the quiet lesbians?
I thought
go there.
I thought that was so like funny, but also made me think. Like, I feel like, oh, okay, you've got your flag, you've got your pride. See, there are things for you, but we're looking at that like all gay people are like extroverted and like love color and love like a big, exaggerated thing. And we also have this stereotype too that gay men are just so flamboyant and eccentric and this and that. And I love it. Where are all the quiet lesbians? Where can I go? And even in the community she has, she's like, I don't fit in there.
It speaks to a point of substance abuse is really high in LGBT communities. And when you look at literature around that, a lot of it is that the only spaces where you can associate with just all LGBT people is bars and pride and party. So we don't have enough, especially like for youth, like we don't have enough substance-free calm zones to where substance and partying becomes very much a part of the experience. So I thought that's a really good point to kind of think about too. If you've got a client who is struggling with substance abuse, but that's their only safe space, what do you do with that? So she made a good point about that.
Something that came up for me for client consideration is if we have the parent of a child that is gay but not coming out and they know they're not gay. When she made the point about when her mother made that one statement to her of how she wanted to raise her as she was straight because she knew the world was not going to change for her, and that she wanted to protect her from that so she could have a better life. But in reality, all it did is it internalized homophobia for her and made it that much worse, and she regretted it. And that's something that we have to take in consideration is if we're working with parents of children that are in the process of coming out, or they know that they are gay but they're not coming out to their parents, that the consequences of forcing heterosexism onto their children can have so many more repercussions of tearing themselves apart from the inside out because they feel like they can't go to their parents and society already doesn't accept them. So I need to be straight, but I feel that I am gay, but I can't be gay, and it's like there's all these other things going on. So again, working with the parents and promoting, letting them be who they want to be, and that even though we know these things are out there, we can't force our own values on our children.
Yeah. And you really have to work with those parents. And there are the parents who are doing it because they're trying to enforce gender norms. But there's also parents, and I identify with that a lot and thinking about that are really just trying to do the best they can and make decisions that they think are going to help their child, or they don't know any differently, so they really are trying. And then you have these adults who have inadvertently caused their children pain, and they are living with the guilt of what they inflicted on their children unknowingly. So then, I mean, especially in counseling them, like, they're dealing with a lot of guilt for what for making their children's lives harder when that would never be what they were intending to do in the first place. And then processing that and finding a way out of that and finding, like, forgiveness for not just from themselves, but possibly even from their children.
Yeah, and it said almost that exact same thing that I had written down in Sue and Sue when it was talking about how working with the parents is so important. It said that rather than allowing the clients, being like the parents in this case, to internalize self-blame, counselors can help them understand that it is societal prejudice that is the problem, and that, you know, here they are seeing that their children's lives are so hard, and they're thinking, did I contribute to this? You know, did I do this? Helping them realize, it wasn't you. It was the societal prejudice, and it was the systems that are in place. You know?
Yeah. I thought that it was particularly important how she was talking about how she was really thinking about quitting comedy because she was no longer going to engage in self-deprecation. Because when you are a part of a marginalized people and you engage in self-deprecation, it's not humility, it's humiliation. And that was really powerful.
Mm-hmm. It made me think, too, how many other comedians that are, like, part of a minority group feel that way, too. Because, you know, you watch a comedy, say it's a black person, you know, they make at least a few jabs at their blackness. You watch one about someone that's gay, they talk about their gayness. The Asian, it's all about they're Asian. You know, making jabs at themselves, and we laugh, and sometimes I'm a little like, okay, enough. You know, like, it's like Kevin Hart, I feel like, is a good example. He's always, like, jabbing at his own blackness and the stereotypes about his dad not being there and all black, whatever. And it made me realize, I wonder if there are other comedians, too, that are like, this is self-deprecating, this is humiliating, but this is what my manager and my agent wants from me.
It appeals to the dominant culture, the white consumer, like, oh, this is funny, I can laugh at that too, because I already laughed at it to begin with, so why not laugh with them?
Oh,
They're
see,
making
the black guy said it, I can
so
laugh.
It's fine, yeah.
So they're just perpetuating that.
Talked about that when the men in the group were like, I'm afraid to keep talking about this because I'm afraid this is going to give you white guy to permission to think that this is okay, but it's not. This is all because of you.
Yeah.
I thought Hannah Gadsberry had such a good and artful grasp on decentralizing the human condition from men and saying, like, this is my story and I cannot care for it any longer and I need you to hear my story. I thought that it was such a move towards growth, towards self-care, of just, like, what it means to empower yourself, because that's what empowerment looks like. Is she took her platform and she took it forcibly from your comfort. She brought that tension up and she choked you with it. So just, like, I would recommend Nanette to my clients.
Yeah.
With some just warnings that it is a journey.
I think I'm going to sneak it on some people, too, and be like, you want to watch this great stand-up? It's hilarious. Oh, it's the funniest thing I've ever seen.
And 15 minutes in, when she gets to the self-deprecation thing.
Because it starts off, like, hilarious. Like, oh, this is a really funny, stand-up. And then he gets into it, and then you're like, okay, we've got to blend. But
Socks you in the gut there.
She touched on sexism. She talked on heterosexism. She did it. And that's all.
I also love that she talked about mental health. And people, like you have to suffer to be an artist, and taking medication is limiting. And I love first of all, I love how she talked about Van Gogh and how she knew that, and I was like, I love that.
Yeah, she knew her shit, and she
for him a college
self-medication.
Yeah. It was very clear, and it's also very important to understand, like, there is also that stigma that if you take medication for mental health, that is somehow different than taking medication for diabetes or high blood pressure.
So she pulls an ableism.
Yeah. So I thought that was also very important, and it sort of snuck in there under everything else because everything she was saying was so important. But I really want that to, it was a very sliver part of that, but it was very important as well that she was advocating for that as well. That you don't get to say that it's not okay for me to take medication if I need it.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have an opinion that matters in this case.
Yeah.
So I really hope she actually didn't quit comedy.
I hope maybe
really
she
hope
quit
that-
comedy, but maybe she can put it into an outlet that
Like
is
TED
best
Talks.
for her.
I would so go listen to her.
Yeah,
would
I hope
so-
she
I
can
would
do
so go
something.
see her.
with and share her knowledge still, but
Yes.
not in a self-deprecating way that comedy
Yeah.
has.
No, yeah, absolutely.
All right.
I
think we did it.
So I
You
want to
did.
finish on
Oh, yeah.
one last
Oh,
thing. It's more of a statement to end on a happier note. Taking from Cubism, we can only correctly understand the fabric of reality by understanding all perspectives, but we must value and include every perspective. We must not assign value that one perspective is more valuable than another.
That was great.
Yeah.
I
Great way
wanted-
to end this.
and
That's
on that
great. Thank you.
Perfect. Let me
All right.
unlock my computer. Hello, Dr. Noiseworthy, as we still have to do this. It's an hour.